What if I told you that obsession doesn't begin with how you look, what you say, or how perfectly you perform, but with the energy you carry when you walk away? Because the deepest attraction isn't created by trying harder. It's created when someone feels something awaken inside themselves in your presence and realizes they can't access it without you. That is the inner connection. And when it's real, it's unforgettable. Because when someone becomes obsessed, it's rarely about attraction alone. It's about how they feel when they're with you. And the deepest version of that feeling comes from one simple, powerful experience, feeling most like themselves in your presence. Think about how rare that actually is. Most people spend their lives editing, performing, bracing themselves. They're trying to be impressive, competent, confident, unshakable, especially men. From a very early age, they learn that uncertainty is weakness, vulnerability is dangerous, and not having the answer means losing value. So they armor up, they keep it together, they hold it in. Now imagine what it's like to meet someone who doesn't require that armor. When you're with someone who doesn't rush to judge, who doesn't interrupt with advice, who doesn't try to reshape you into something more convenient, you feel something drop, your shoulders relax, your breathing changes, you stop performing and start existing. And that feeling is intoxicating because it's rare. This is where real connection is born. Not in witty banter, not in perfect chemistry, but in emotional permission. When you allow someone to show up as they are, uncertain, flawed, figuring it out, you create a space that feels safe without being dull, accepting without being passive. You're not applauding every behavior, but you're separating the person from the performance. You're saying, without words, you don't have to earn your place here. And that changes everything. Because when someone feels emotionally safe with you, they start revealing parts of themselves they don't show the rest of the world. Not because you demanded it, not because you pushed, but because it felt natural, effortless, almost inevitable. And here's the part most people miss. You don't create this by being endlessly agreeable or accommodating. You create it by being grounded, by being present, by not making their emotions about you. When he shares a doubt and you don't panic, when he admits confusion and you don't lose attraction, when he opens up and you don't rush to fix it, that's when trust forms. Because suddenly he realizes something profound. I don't have to be on with this person. And once someone experiences that level of ease with you, they don't just enjoy it, they crave it. This is why trying to impress never works long term. Impressing keeps things on the surface, but safety pulls people deeper. And depth is where attachment lives. There's another layer to this that's just as important. When you allow someone to be fully themselves with you, you also invite authenticity from yourself. You stop curating, you stop managing their reactions, you stop shrinking or performing to maintain interest. You become real. And authenticity is magnetic. Because now the connection isn't built on who you're trying to be, it's built on who you actually are. That's when someone doesn't just like you, they feel bonded to you. The connection becomes irreplaceable because it's not transactional, it's relational. And notice what this doesn't require. It doesn't require emotional labor. It doesn't require you to be endlessly patient or self-sacrificing. It requires boundaries. It requires self-trust. It requires you to know that you don't need to control how someone feels in order to be valued. When you trust yourself enough to allow space for silence, for honesty, for imperfection, you give someone the greatest gift possible, the freedom to be human. And here's the paradox. The more you allow someone to be themselves, the more they want to show up as their best self with you. Not because you asked, but because they want to rise to the standard of the connection. That's when obsession starts to form, quietly, internally, without force. Because now you're not just someone they're attracted to, you're the place where they feel understood, where they feel calm, where they feel like they can exhale. And people don't let go of the places where they can finally breathe. There's a quiet but powerful shift that happens when you stop trying to be chosen and start living as someone who chooses. It changes the entire dynamic of connection, because attraction was never meant to be chased. It was meant to be invited. Chasing comes from fear. Fear of losing someone, fear of being forgotten, fear that if you don't do more, say more, prove more, the connection will slip away. And while that fear is understandable, it has a cost. The moment you start chasing, you hand over your power. You begin orienting your behavior around how to keep someone, instead of whether they're truly aligned with your life. Invitation is different. Invitation is calm, it's confident. It says, "This is my world. You're welcome in it if you add to it." And that energy is unmistakable. When you're deeply engaged in your own life, your passions, your friendships, your growth, you stop scanning every interaction for reassurance. You're not waiting by the phone. You're not measuring your worth by response times or mixed signals. You're present where you are, and that presence is attractive because it communicates abundance, not need. Here's the truth. People are drawn to momentum, to someone who is going somewhere, who is lit up by their own life, not because it's impressive, but because it feels alive. When someone steps into that energy, they don't feel responsible for your happiness. They feel inspired to be part of it. And this is where obsession begins to quietly take root. Because now, his interest isn't fueled by pressure. It's fueled by choice. When you invite rather than chase, you allow desire to emerge naturally. You give him space to wonder, space to pursue, space to decide. And when someone decides on their own, the attachment is far deeper than anything created through persuasion or effort. Think about how different it feels to be wanted versus being needed. Being needed feels heavy. Being wanted feels empowering. Invitation creates wanting. Chasing creates obligation. And invitation doesn't mean being distant or cold. It doesn't mean withholding affection or playing hard to get. It means showing interest without attack. Meant to outcome. It means being warm without being anxious, open without being overinvested. You respond because you want to, not because you're afraid not to. You reach out because it feels good, not because silence scares you. And that emotional self-regulation is magnetic because it signals security. Security is attractive when someone senses that you're okay with or without them. Something unexpected happens. Instead of pulling away, they lean in because your independence removes pressure, and pressure is the fastest way to kill desire. Now there's another subtle layer here. When you live from invitation, you also raise the standard of who gets access to you. You're no longer trying to convince someone to choose you. You're observing whether they show up consistently, respectfully, and with intention. That shift changes how you're perceived. Suddenly, your attention means something. Your time has weight. Your presence feels earned, not assumed. And when someone realizes they can't take you for granted, their focus sharpens, their effort increases. Not because you demanded it, but because value invites investment. This is the moment where attraction becomes internalized. He's not responding to what you're doing. He's responding to how he feels when he steps into your orbit. Calm, energized, curious, grounded. That's the inner connection at work. Because now, you're not just someone he likes. You're someone who represents a lifestyle, a feeling, a version of himself he enjoys being around. And walking away from that doesn't feel neutral. It feels like loss. Invitation also protects you. It keeps you from overextending, overgiving, or overcommitting too soon. It allows the connection to unfold at a pace that feels mutual rather than forced. And mutual energy is the only kind that lasts. So when you stop chasing and start inviting, you don't just attract more, you attract better. You attract someone who steps forward willingly, who engages with intention, who feels drawn not by urgency but by desire, and desire chosen freely is the kind that stays. Attraction doesn't grow in sameness, it grows in contrast. And the kind of contrast that creates obsession isn't about being dramatic or unpredictable. It's about emotional polarity. It's the space between strength and softness, confidence and warmth, independence and intimacy. When those opposites coexist, something powerful happens. Connection gains tension, and tension keeps desire alive. Most people misunderstand polarity. They think it means playing a role or exaggerating traits to appear more attractive. But real polarity isn't manufactured, it's felt. It comes from being anchored in who you are while remaining emotionally open to someone else. You're not rigid and you're not shapeless, you're grounded. When someone senses that grounding, they relax because they're not worried about knocking you off balance. You're steady, you're self-assured. You don't need constant reassurance to feel secure. And paradoxically, that strength creates space for tenderness. You can be warm without being clingy, present without being dependent, engaged without losing yourself. That's where attraction deepens, because now he doesn't feel like he's carrying the emotional weight of the connection alone. He's not responsible for your stability. He's invited into a dynamic where both people bring something whole to the table. That balance creates respect, and respect is inseparable from desire. Polarity also shows up in how you respond emotionally. When you're expressive but not reactive, honest but not explosive, you create emotional intrigue. He never feels like he has to walk on eggshells, but he also knows your emotions are real. They matter. They have depth, and depth is captivating. There's something incredibly attractive about someone who can feel deeply without being overwhelmed by those feelings. Someone who can experience disappointment without collapsing, excitement without losing composure, affection without attachment. That emotional mastery creates a sense of mystery, not because you're hiding, but because you're self-contained. And here's the key: self-contained doesn't mean closed off. It means you choose when and how to open, rather than spilling everything at once. You reveal yourself in layers, you allow connection to unfold, and that unfolding keeps interest alive because there's always more to discover. This is why polarity thrives in presence. When you're fully in the moment, listening, responding, engaged, you create intimacy. But when you also maintain your sense of self, your opinions, your boundaries, you create tension. Intimacy plus tension equals attraction that lasts. Without polarity, connection becomes flat, predictable, safe, but unexciting. With polarity, safety and excitement coexist. He feels both comfortable and stimulated, grounded and curious, and that emotional combination is addictive. Another subtle element of polarity is not rushing to close the gap, not immediately defining everything, not trying to secure certainty before it's naturally formed. When you allow uncertainty to exist without anxiety, you give desire room to grow. Because desire needs space. When you don't rush to resolve every question, when you don't over-communicate to eliminate ambiguity, you allow his imagination to engage. He wonders, he reflects, he feels into the connection, and in doing so, he becomes emotionally invested. That investment is internal. It's not something you ask for. It's something he experiences. And polarity also shows up in self-respect. When you value your time, your energy, your emotional well-being, you send a powerful signal. You're not available at any cost. You're available by choice. That distinction creates attraction rooted in admiration, not convenience. Admiration is a powerful force. When someone admires you, they want to rise to meet you. They don't feel entitled to you. They feel motivated. And that motivation fuels effort, curiosity, and consistency. This is the kind of connection that doesn't burn out quickly. It doesn't rely on intensity alone. It's sustained by balance, by the ongoing dance between closeness and autonomy, vulnerability and strength. And in that dance, something remarkable happens. He doesn't feel trapped and he doesn't feel distant. He feels engaged. He feels alive. He feels drawn in again and again, not because he needs you, but because he wants to be there. That's the power of emotional polarity. It turns connection into chemistry, chemistry into desire, and desire into something he can't quite let go of. There is a subtle art to leaving space, and it's one of the most misunderstood forces in attraction. People often confuse space with distance, or mystery with manipulation. But real space isn't about pulling away to provoke a reaction. It's about trusting the connection enough not to overfill it. Because desire doesn't grow in constant saturation. It grows in the pauses. When everything is explained, clarified, and expressed immediately, there's nothing left for the mind to do. And the mind is where longing lives. When you allow moments to linger, when you don't rush to define or decode every feeling, you invite curiosity. You invite reflection. You give someone the opportunity to miss you. And missing someone is powerful. Not because it's painful, but because it's revealing. It shows us what matters. It tells us where our attention naturally returns when nothing is demanding it. When you leave space, you allow him to notice his own desire instead of responding to yours. This is why over-explaining is so costly. When you narrate every thought, justify every feeling, or preemptively reassure, You remove tension from the connection. You're trying to create certainty, but certainty too early can flatten attraction. It turns something alive into something resolved. Space keeps things alive, and this doesn't require silence or withdrawal. It requires restraint, knowing when to stop talking, knowing when a smile says more than a paragraph, knowing when presence is enough. There's confidence in that restraint. It says, I trust that what we have doesn't need to be forced. And trust is attractive because it signals self-assurance. Leaving space also means allowing the connection to unfold at its own pace. Not rushing intimacy, not accelerating emotional depth to secure a bond. When you allow timing to do its work, you create a rhythm that feels natural rather than pressured. And pressure is the enemy of desire. When someone feels rushed into commitment, into vulnerability, into certainty, they may comply, but they don't connect. Compliance isn't attraction, it's obligation. Space removes obligation and replaces it with choice. Choice is where obsession begins, because when he chooses to lean in, to reach out, to invest emotionally without being prompted, the attachment becomes internal. It's not about pleasing you, it's about satisfying something within himself. Space also gives you room to remain connected to your own life, your goals, your friendships, your passions. When you don't collapse your world around the connection, you remain whole, and wholeness is compelling. Someone who has their own gravity doesn't need to pull. They simply exist, and others feel drawn in. There's another layer to this that's often overlooked. Leaving space allows for imagination. When everything is spelled out, imagination shuts down. But when there are gaps, moments of silence, unanswered questions, time apart, the mind fills them in. And what the mind creates often feels more powerful than anything explicitly said. Imagination fuels desire. He replays conversations. He wonders what you're thinking. He anticipates the next interaction. And in doing so, he becomes emotionally engaged even when you're not physically present. That's the kind of engagement that lingers. Space also protects the connection from emotional burnout. When intensity is constant, it exhausts itself. But when intensity comes in waves, connection, space, connection, it renews itself. Each reunion feels fresh. Each interaction feels chosen. And chosen moments feel special. Leaving space requires trust in yourself. Trust that you are enough without constant validation. Trust that if something is meant to grow, it will respond to breathing room rather than suffocation. And that trust changes how you show up. You become calmer, more playful, less attached to outcomes. And that emotional ease is contagious. It invites others to relax into the connection rather than brace themselves against it. Ultimately, space isn't about withholding. It's about allowing desire to form, allowing emotions to settle, allowing the connection to deepen organically. And when you do that, you don't just give him space to want you. You give him space to realize he already does. There's a profound difference between being someone a person depends on and being someone who inspires them to rise. One creates attachment out of fear. The other creates devotion out of growth. And the kind of connection that lasts, the kind that turns into obsession, always lives in the second category. Because the deepest bonds aren't formed when someone feels they need you to survive. They're formed when being with you challenges them to become more of who they're capable of being. When someone feels emotionally dependent, the connection becomes heavy. There's pressure, expectation, a subtle sense of responsibility that starts to drain desire. But when someone feels energized by you, expanded by you, the connection feels alive. It feels like momentum. And that's the shift that changes everything. You don't trigger growth by pushing, correcting, or demanding better. Growth doesn't respond well to pressure. You trigger growth by example, by embodying self-respect, by living with intention, by holding standards not as ultimatums but as quiet truths you live by. When you know who you are and what you value, you don't need to lecture someone into meeting you there. You simply stand there, and that presence becomes an invitation. Not everyone will accept it, but the ones who do will feel compelled to rise. This is where obsession begins to form, because now the connection isn't just emotionally comforting, it's aspirational. Being with you feels like expansion, like clarity, like alignment. And here's the key. You're not trying to change him. You're allowing him to see himself more clearly. You're reflecting back his potential, not by pointing it out, but by responding to the version of him that shows up with integrity. When he's thoughtful, you engage. When he's consistent, you deepen. When he's aligned, you open. And when he's not, you don't punish. You simply don't overinvest. That feedback loop is powerful. It teaches without teaching. It guides without controlling. And it allows him to connect effort with reward in a way that feels organic rather than forced. This is what makes the connection feel earned. And earned connection carries weight. Because now, he's not showing up out of fear of losing you. He's showing up because he likes who he is when he's with you. He feels more capable, more grounded, more intentional. People don't cling to those who rescue them. They cling to those who awaken them. Triggering growth also means not cushioning every discomfort, not smoothing every edge. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is allow someone to sit with the consequences of their choices, not as punishment, but as respect. Respect says, I trust you to handle this. Dependency says, I'll handle this for you. And respect is far more attractive. When you respect someone's autonomy, you give them the dignity of choice. You allow them to take ownership of their actions, their effort, their direction. And ownership breeds pride. Pride breeds commitment. That commitment is internal. It's not about pleasing you. It's about aligning with themselves. There's also something important here about boundaries. Growth-triggering connection requires boundaries, not walls, but clear edges, knowing what you accept, knowing what you don't, and being willing to walk away from dynamics that pull you out of alignment. Boundaries create clarity, and clarity creates attraction. When someone knows where they stand with you, they don't feel confused, they feel challenged. They understand that access to you isn't automatic, it's responsive, and that makes your presence meaningful. This kind of connection doesn't create dependency because it doesn't offer unconditional access. It offers conditional intimacy based on mutual effort, respect, and growth. And that condition isn't threatening. It's motivating because now staying connected to you feels like progress, and progress is addictive. This is why the bond feels so strong. It's not built on fear of loss, but on desire for evolution. He's not afraid of losing you. He's inspired not to. And when someone associates you with becoming better, clearer, stronger, more aligned, the thought of walking away doesn't feel neutral. It feels like regression. That's when connection becomes obsession, not because you're needed, but because you represent the best version of who he's becoming. There is a quiet strength that changes everything in attraction, and it has nothing to do with ultimatums, threats, or emotional withdrawal. It's the simple, grounded truth that you are willing to walk away from what does not honor you. Not angrily, not dramatically, calmly, with self-respect intact. This is where real power lives, because the moment someone senses that you would rather be alone than be diminished, the entire dynamic shifts. Your presence stops being taken for granted. Your words carry more weight. Your silence speaks louder than explanations ever could. And here's the important part. This isn't about testing someone. It's not about trying to make them afraid of losing you. Fear doesn't create obsession. Respect does. When you're willing to walk away, you communicate something profound without saying it out loud. I choose connection, not at the expense of myself.